Boa tarde para a ME Future. Hoje nós temos muita sorte porque nós conseguimos marcar uma apresentação com o Gastón Carrión, who is Head of Strategy for Talent in Latin America at Accenture. And we've got very lucky, Gastón. It's a pleasure welcoming you to ME Future and first edition of the Mining Innovation Summit.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gastón Carrión. I'm a managing director based in Melbourne, in Australia. I'm so sorry I couldn't be with you today personally, physically, but I'm very excited to share some of the thoughts around the future talent. Just a little bit about my background. As you can see in my accent, probably I'm not 100% Australian. I'm Argentinian, living in Australia for the last 13 years. I lead the talent and organization practice across the growth market region that includes Asia Pacific and Latin America, but also I lead globally the talent and organization practice in the natural resources sector. That includes mining and chemicals. What we do in talent and organization briefly is everything around future talent, change management, leadership and culture, talent transformation. So everything that it is related with people and organization, it's essentially what I work do every day. I'm very excited to be here today. And the way that I'm going to be deep diving into the conversation today is in three sections. Section number one, I'm going to talk about what I see or what we see in the talent landscape across not only the mining sector, but globally in other industries. Then we will shift a little bit and talk about some work that we did with the World Economic Forum and the Mining Hub on shaping the future of talent agenda and some considerations for the miners as they shift and create the future talent for the industry. And then I'm going to close with a topic around employee value proposition and how the miners can react to that and start thinking about the next evolution of their practices. So hopefully that would be an insightful session for you all. And so let's kick off. As I mentioned, the talent agenda is becoming a big topic for organizations. And what you can see here in the slide is, first of all, a view around what we see in the global landscape, which essentially is as a result of technology, we are seeing the creation of new roles. So the interaction between human and technology, for example, is creating around 97 million roles across different industries. On the flip side, obviously, technology is creating some distress in the workforce, and 8 out of 10 employees say that they're at risk of burnout. So well-being is becoming a big topic for employers as they think about how they embed technology and digital in the workplace. Now, if we shift to the industry, and this is mining globally, what we see is 73% of the miners believe that skills will be one of the biggest barriers to adoption of new technology. So obviously, as we put remote centers operations, automate the different parts of the value chain of the mine, obviously, we need to have the right talent to execute. On top of that, we are seeing an increase on the employee turnover. So, for example, certain organizations are currently running at 15 to 20% turnover rate, which historically were about 8 to 9%. So it's a significant shift in terms of losing very critical talent, especially to other industries. Then, as we think about the supply side of the workforce perspective, we see that the Gen Z, which is probably the ones that we're starting to attract into the industry, are only 11% as part of the survey that we executed with the Mining Hub and the World Economic Forum are interested in working in the mining industry. So very little percentages of those populations are starting to think about mining as a career. And then the other component is around the cost of hiring. The cost of hiring as a result of trying to attract the right talent has gone, it's probably 4 times more expensive than the reskilling. Now, this creates a little bit of a paradigm for us in terms of what do we do next, okay? So I want to shape a little bit, and I'm sure some of the discussions that happened through the day before has played some of the considerations of the industry, and the industry forces that we analyze with the World Economic Forum and the Mining Hub mainly has been around three areas. Number one is technology, so obviously the digitization and automation of the value chain. Sustainability, that I'm sure that you guys have been discussing throughout the days, but essentially it's around the communities and the impacts to the planet. And then geopolitical, obviously there is a lot of disruption in the way that the miners relates to the different governments and how the countries play together in a global landscape for the industry. All of those elements has implications on the talent agenda. A couple of those implications, I mentioned around the 73% skills gap. We also see a significant shift in the skills of the existing workforce. We will see that 48% of the existing employees will require some level of upskilling or reskilling. Also, if we see the total skills that we have in the industry, at least 40% of those skills will change. So what that means for us is that the spend that we need to put in developing those new skills in certain organizations are talking about more than 30%, in this case 37% of the investment will be in reskilling the internal organization. So big numbers for us to consider and big challenges. Let me go deeper in terms of, a big question for us is how do we converge between what the mining companies need and what the future talent wants from the mining companies? So obviously we need to go to the Gen Z as to start understanding and unpacking this question. So I share the 11% of the Gen Zs are interested in working in mining. 53% of them, when we did the survey, believe that mining is environmentally destructive. So that's perception, right? And 59% say that they know nothing at all about mining careers. That could be different in different countries. I know that in Brazil, for example, people is a bit more connected to the mining sector, but overall, globally, this is what people is talking about in terms of the Gen Z. Now, when we ask the question, what would attract you to come and work in the mining sector for the same generation? 45% said that it's around improving society and environment. 26% was around competitive total rewards, and 16% was around inclusive and diverse workplace. So if you see, number one was around the purpose of the organization and how it drives the sustainability agenda. A few more data points before we deep dive on some of the future thinking around what do we do about it. The Gen Z, their important is around culture and purpose. So some of these statistics, 83%, believes that the purpose of the company is important for their decision of where they want to work. 88% of them care around social and environmental issues. 83% of the Gen Z believes that diversity and inclusion is critical for them to decide where they want to play. And 74% of the Gen Z that we survey will put ahead of the paycheck purpose. Okay, so that's a big statement as we consider around the employee value proposition and how do we want to attract the new generations. Now, through the pandemic, we work with the World Economic Forum, the Mining Hub, and a few of the mining and metals companies to explore the topic around what's the future of work would look like and what do we should consider in order to develop the intersection of talent, technology, and sustainability. Following on the scenarios that I mentioned, we crafted 3 extreme scenarios of who the miners could be in order to profile the future roles. Number one is high-tech leaders. If the miners were high-tech leaders, if the miners were ESG leaders, if the miners were geopolitical adept, and we developed 11 future roles or profiles that we should consider as we think about our evolution of our strategy. So, for example, in the high tech, AI and automation, obviously everyone is talking about Gen AI these days, digital transformation, data scientists and data analysts, that now we have a lot of those roles being demanded by the miners. ESG leaders, socioeconomic, environmental, climate change, geoscientists. And then finally, on the geopolitical adept, obviously the relations with the governments, communities, strategic policy. But also we consider that in some countries, we will still operate very manual as a result of the legislations that we have in terms of progressing the automation agenda. So we will need machine operators and maintainers. Now, what we did is we flagged the demand and the supply for these roles using labor computing analysis. We use a tool called SkyHive. We plot in the market and say, well, how do we deal with these future roles? No surprises. There's no silver bullet. We cannot just only buy talent. If you see, it's empty. So that means that there is not enough capability in market to be able to respond to what the miners will need in the future. So the options that we have really is about buying and building, or building internally, or borrowing talent. And I'm going to talk a little bit more around borrowing. But the reality is that now when we see this as the mining group, we thought, well, actually, we need to put more and more investment in upskilling, reskilling, and doing the workforce transition agenda for our workforce. Now, if we think about, the topic around attracting the right talent, because obviously one thing is to be able to develop the talent that we have within. That's an important consideration, but also the Gen Z, we need to start attracting. So we, with the group, we crafted these future talent journeys. I'm not going to go into every detail, but essentially it's think about the talent framework from, the sourcing, hiring, to the company exit or retire. And I highlighted in the slide some of the innovative practices that we talked about with the group, and that could be helpful as you think about your talent strategies. Number one is the redefinition of the EVP. And I'm going to give more details around that in a second, but it's not just about pay, as I explained before. Number two, in the onboarding process, is the networking opportunities. Have the opportunity to connect with future talent earlier in their careers and bring it some of the expertise of the senior mining specialists into the discussions with the future generations. We also explore the idea of peer-to-peer learning cultures within the organization and outside of the organization to create an environment for collaboration. We talked about the retention strategies, especially for the minority groups. As we bring more females into the workforce, we also start to see quite a lot of turnover coming up. So the question is, what are the things that we might need to do in either the work design, the working models, in order to enable these new talent sources to thrive at work? The strategic partnerships, obviously events like this, and where we are able to learn from each other, create connections with universities, associations, and so forth, because a lot of the skills that we need to build, they are not inside of the mining organizations. So we might need to go and partner with others in order to accelerate the learning interventions. And then finally, as we think about people leaving the industry, is there an opportunity to create alumni somewhere we can re-engage with them? Can we think about gig economy opportunities across the mining sector to perhaps create talent pools or within the industry in order to be able to accelerate the needs in each of the locations where we operate? So that's some considerations for people as they think about their talent strategies. Now, I talked about EVP, and we spent quite a bit of time with the team of the Mining Hub and the rest of the miners thinking about, what's the EVP would look like. We use a framework that we research in Accenture, which is called the Net Better Off model, which essentially is 6 dimensions that explains 60%, 64% of people potential at work. So essentially, if we are doing these 6 things right, we have higher chances not only to retain the talent and attract the talent, but also make sure that the talent thrive at work. So I'm gonna briefly talk about that, and this has been customized to the mining industry, and you can see the details in the report that I will share at the end. But essentially, number one is the purpose, being, making a difference, impacting to the environments and the communities. Number two is around the financial, and the financial has the two parts, the pay, but also the career mobility and progression. Number three is around relational, so which is how do we connect the line managers or the line leaders with the workforce and create the sense of belonging and inclusion as we bring new generations and also more females into the workplace. Employability, and this is a really important one as we continue to automate the industry, as we continue to decarbonize the industry. How do we develop the skills that we need for the future? Emotional and mental, obviously, as a result of a lot of the work being moved out of the field and moving into remote centers operations, there is more risk if we don't have mental well-being. So how do we work on that? And finally, physical, which, this is a must-have for our industry, but also consider some elements around well-being from a stress perspective. So I think when you think about EVP, the discussions that we have with the team is we need to think about these 6 dimensions. Okay. Now, I plotted some considerations of the EVP using public data to see where each of the miners sits in some of these categories. And, obviously the intent of this is not to, finger point to each other and see who is better and who is not, but collectively as an industry, what are we hearing and listening from our workforce, and what are the things that we need to work with? So there are 5 top priorities that if you were to think about your next talent strategy, you might want to consider. Number 1 is I&D. We continue to make progress, but there is not enough. L&C, there is a new leadership requirement in terms of how do we lead teams in these new ways of working that has been created as a result of the pandemic and as we continue the automation and decarbonization agenda. Innovation, which I think these events are really important to do that in order to push the agenda forward. Quality of work and performance. So again, what I wanted to do as part of this conversation is to say, well, this is the EVP, but this is elements that are translated in how the workforce think about this. And then I want to close this conversation with the outcomes of the research. So as part of the research, we came out with 10 shifts to transform the future talent in mining. Obviously, this has been informed with the intent of, be more sustainable, implement data and digital into the value chain of the miners, and obviously having a more inclusive and diverse workforce. There are 3 layers of change that, we thought that it would be important to consider. 2 of them are internal. 1 is industry-based. So the first one is how do we transform the talent journeys and the organizational architecture? That it is around the blended of sourcing strategies. Where do we get the talent? What talent do we bring into the organizations? How do we engage early in their career? So how do we create networks on where people can understand more around the industry so they can get excited about working in the mining sector as a way to impact the environment positively for the future? How do we create customized employee values proposition using that EVP model that I mentioned before? The second part is around redesigning the talent and leadership frameworks. There are new skills, there is new flexible models that we need to put in place. We might want to consider creating talent marketplaces in order to provide mobility within the different elements of the organization as we think about the workforce transition agenda. And we definitely needs to create a new leadership and culture DNA, because the mining is changing, the way the work is done is changing. So we need different ways to manage the workforce in the future. And then finally, which I think it is part of what this event is all about, is how do we create an industry level grow and deploy model, if possible. And we dreamt about that with the participants of this work. We said, well, there are 3 things that we might want to consider. Should we create an industry-based future skill mapping, so we really understand collectively where the mining sector is going? Can we create a talent consortium where we can work together to enable better conversations with universities or educational institutions or organizations or the EOMs and so forth in order to be able to accelerate the pathway for learning transformation? And then is there an opportunity to create talent pools and where we can share some of those skills that they are not in abundance that we need in order to progress some of these key agenda items for the industry? So that's probably the closing. I just want to say big thank you for having me today. Hopefully you're having a great time through the event. You will be able to access the research that we did with the WEF and the Mining Hub in Accenture.com, which is called Transforming Future Talent in Mining and Metals. There is a new release coming up in 2 or 3 weeks, which is around responsible leadership in mining and metals, that you will also be able to access and probably explore the topic around leadership and culture and how we create responsible cultures in the sector. So thank you very much, and hopefully you have a good event coming up, and hopefully I will see you soon. Cheers.
I'm not from the mining industry, so that was quite interesting to actually hear all that is being done and how you guys created that framework in order to face that transition. So once again, thank you very much. And we're waiting for you in Belo Horizonte anytime you can.